It was just past midnight when Ethan Brooks heard the knock. Soft, almost apologetic, the kind of knock that sounded like it expected to be ignored. He opened the door an inch.
Just
A
half
woman
glass
stood in
of
the
milk.
rain-gray hair plastered to her forehead, hands trembling around a worn shawl. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for shelter. "If you don't have a full glass," she whispered, "half a glass of milk would be enough." Ethan almost shut the door. Then a smell drifted past her hospital antiseptic and something inside him froze. The smell pulled him 3 years backward
Please,
before he could
Ethan,
stop it.
just a little milk
Bleach and
for the
floor wax
child.
and something underneath that, hospitals never quite managed to scrub away. For a moment, Ethan was not standing at the door of his garage at all. He was in a corridor on the 4th floor of St. Mary's holding a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, listening to a machine breathe for the woman he loved. He blinked and the woman on the porch came back into focus. She was still standing there, still trembling, still waiting for him to either slam the door or do something he would have to live with afterward. Behind him, the kitchen clock ticked its steady, indifferent rhythm. Upstairs, Lily was asleep with her arm flung over the stuffed elephant Claire had bought her the week before everything fell apart. Down here, the refrigerator hummed against a near-empty shelf. There was 1 carton of milk left, a small one. Enough for 2 more bowls of cereal before payday on Friday. Ethan was a man who had learned the way some men learn that kindness was a luxury he could not always afford. Not because his heart had hardened, but because he had spent it down to the lining more than once and discovered that the world rarely paid him back. 2 months ago, a man in a pressed shirt had walked into Brooks Auto with a story about a dying mother and walked out with $300 worth of catalytic converter. Last winter, a teenage boy had cried in the waiting area until Ethan handed him a free oil change, then keyed the side of a customer's truck on the way out. Ethan had stopped telling people these stories. He had simply started keeping the door locked after dark. He had not realized until this moment that the door he locked at night was not the same door he locked inside himself. She had not moved. Rain dripped from the hem of her coat onto the concrete step. He could see now that what she was holding was not a shawl at all, but a child wrapped in a coat too big for either of them. And the child was so still that for one horrifying second, Ethan thought she might already be gone. Then a thin, wavering whistle came from inside the bundle. Not a song, not even a melody, just 3 soft notes like a bird trying to remember how to sing. The woman flinched as if the sound itself caused her pain and tightened her arms around the small body she carried. "Please," she said again, quieter than before. "I'm not asking for anything else, just a little milk. I'll bring the glass back. I swear to God I'll bring it back." Ethan's hand was still on the door. The polite refusal was already on his tongue. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't have anything to give you tonight." It would have been a kind lie, kinder than most. He could have said it and closed the door and gone upstairs and lain awake until morning, telling himself she had probably found another house, a better house, a house with more to spare. He was about to say it. And then the woman looked past his shoulder. There was a small movement at the top of the stairs. Lily had come halfway down without making a sound the way she always did when she heard voices at the door drawn by the same curiosity that used to drive her mother to her feet at every knock. She stood there in her pajamas with the elephant tucked under one arm, a girl who had her father's careful eyes and her mother's narrow shoulders watching. The woman on the porch made a small broken sound in her throat. "She looks just like her," she whispered, and it was not a sentence she had meant to say out loud. It came out the way things come out of people when they are too tired to keep them in. "She looks just like her mother." Ethan went very still. The rain seemed louder for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, all of it pressing against him at once. "What did you say?" The woman's eyes widened. She had heard her own voice as if from a distance, and only now realized what she had let slip. "Nothing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was thinking of someone else. Forgive me." But she had said it, and the child in her arms, perhaps disturbed by the change in her grandmother's grip, whistled again. 3 soft notes. The sound of something small trying to keep itself company in the dark. Lily came the rest of the way down the stairs without being told. She had heard the whistle the way a child hears the cry of another child by instinct, by something older than language. She crossed the kitchen in her bare feet and opened the refrigerator and took out the small carton of milk with both hands the way she had been taught and walked it over to her father without saying a word. She held it up to him. Her eyes were grave in the way only an 8-year-old's eyes can be.
"Daddy," she said. That was all. Just Daddy. No question in it, no instruction, just the soft weight of trust placed in his hand along with the carton. Ethan stood there with the milk in one hand and the door in the other, and for a long second he was not a man making a decision. He was a man recognizing one that had already been made for him by someone smaller and braver and not yet old enough to know what kindness costs. He stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. "Please, come in out of the rain." 2 miles away, in a row of low buildings that had once been a motel and was now something the city no longer had a name for, the lights had gone out 4 hours earlier. Sarah Whitman had known it was coming for a week. The notice from the utility company had come folded under her door on a Monday, and she had read it twice in the dim bathroom light because the kitchen bulb had already been dead for a month. She owed $87. She had 31. She had spent 11 of those 31 on a bottle of children's fever reducer that turned out to be the wrong kind, and then 4 more on the right kind. And then she had sat on the edge of the bed and counted what was left, and understood with a clarity that frightened her that there was nothing left at all. She had been a woman of no small strength once. The neighbors who had been on this block long enough still remembered. 22 years she had pushed a cleaning cart down the corridors of St. Mary's 2 shifts back to back when the rent went up single-handedly, raising a daughter who had repaid her by disappearing into a haze somewhere outside Reno and leaving behind a child no bigger than a loaf of bread. There had been a winter years back when a businessman in a private suite had tried to press 2 crisp $100 bills into her pale-lined palm after she cleaned up something he had been too ashamed to handle himself. Sarah had folded the bills in half and laid them on his bedside table without a word. "That's my job, sir." That was all she had said. The story had traveled the staff lounge for a month. People still mentioned it sometimes the way people mention things about a person they assume will always be there. But strength, Sarah had learned, was a kind of currency too, and it could be spent. The granddaughter who slept beside her now was named Maya. She was 9 years old, small for her age, and she did not talk much because she had learned somewhere along the way that talking sometimes drew attention, and attention was not always safe. She drew instead. She drew on the back of envelopes and on the white margins of grocery flyers and on the inside cover of the one library book Sarah had been allowed to keep when the branch closed. She drew houses with too many windows and dogs that looked like rabbits and rabbits that looked like nothing at all. She carried a small stuffed rabbit named Buttons everywhere she went. It had belonged to her mother once before her mother became the kind of person who lost things on purpose. When Maya was frightened, she did not cry. Sarah had noticed this the first week the child came to live with her and had wondered then what kind of life teaches a 4-year-old not to cry. Instead, Maya whistled. 3 soft notes, always the same. A private signal to no one in particular. The sound of a child reminding herself that she was still there. The fever had come on a Sunday. By Tuesday, the child's forehead was hot enough to feel through a folded washcloth. By Wednesday, her breath had begun to whistle in a different way, a wetter way, and Sarah had walked the length of the corridor knocking on every door she still felt she had the right to knock on. The first door was answered by a woman who did not let her finish the sentence, the second by a man who shut it before she opened her mouth, the third by a younger man drunk who told her if she didn't get off his step, he would call the police, and she had stood there for a long moment trying to decide whether being arrested might at least mean a hospital before she turned and walked back to her room and closed her own door behind her and put her hands over her face. It was then that she had remembered the tin. She kept it under the bed. It was the kind of tin that had once held shortbread cookies with a faded picture of a Scottish village on the lid. Inside were the things she had not been able to throw away. 3 Christmas cards from patients she had outlived. A photograph of her late husband at a barbecue in 1978 holding a paper plate and laughing at something off camera.
the folded program from her daughter's high school graduation. And at the very bottom beneath all of it, a small piece of notepaper that had yellowed at the edges. It had been given to her by a woman in room 307 on a night Sarah would never forget. The woman's name had been Claire Brooks. She had not yet turned 35, and she had known by then that she was running out of seasons. She had pressed the paper into Sarah's hand on the last clear evening before the morphine took her conversation away, and she had said very quietly, "My husband owns a garage. If you ever need anything fixed, anything at all, you take this to him. He'll know who you are. He'll take care of you." Sarah had thanked her. She had folded the paper without reading it and slipped it into the pocket of her uniform. She had thought even then that she would never use it. Not because she was too proud, though she was, but because it had not felt like an offer of repair. It had felt like a thank you note from a dying woman to the only stranger in the building who had ever called her by her first name. Now, 3 years later, Sarah read the address on the paper for the first time. Brooks Auto, Hawthorne Street. It was almost 3 miles away. The rain had been falling since noon. Maya was burning and Sarah did not have a car, and the bus had stopped running at 10. She wrapped the child in her own coat. She put the paper in her pocket. She stepped out into the rain and began to walk. She did not remember most of the walk afterward. What she remembered was the moment she came around the corner of Hawthorne Street and saw at the far end of the block a single yellow porch light burning above a low building set back from the road. The light was steady. It did not flicker. It looked from a distance like the only honest thing left in the city. She remembered thinking before she could stop herself that whoever lived in that house was the kind of person who left the light on for somebody. She did not yet know it was her. Inside on a plaid couch that had seen better decades, Sarah sat with Maya curled against her chest and tried not to drip on the rug. Ethan had brought a towel without being asked. He had warmed the milk on the stove instead of giving it cold, and Sarah had not realized until she saw him do it how long it had been since anyone had thought to warm anything for her. Lily sat on the bottom step with her elephant in her lap and watched Maya the way one careful animal watches another. Maya did not look back. Maya was looking at the ceiling where the light fixture cast soft circles against the paint, and her small hand had loosened around the stuffed rabbit just enough to suggest that for the first time in a long night, she was not afraid. Ethan handed Sarah the warm cup. She took it with both hands. She did not drink it. She held it out toward the child instead. "There you go, baby," she whispered. "There you go." There are moments that arrive at a person's door dressed as ordinary moments, and only later, sometimes years later, do they reveal what they actually were. Ethan did not know yet that the woman on his couch had once held his daughter for him in a hallway he could no longer bear to walk down. Sarah did not know yet that the man who had warmed her granddaughter's milk was the husband of the only patient in 22 years who had ever called her by her first name. Lily did not know that she had just let into her house the woman who had once helped her father carry her on a sleepless afternoon when she was barely 4 years old. None of them knew. That was the mercy of it, and also the weight. The rain went on outside. The yellow light went on burning. And in a house that had been quiet for 3 years, 4 people who did not yet understand that they had been waiting for one another sat together in the kind of silence that does not need to be filled. There is something we do not often say about the people who come to our door at the worst hour of their lives. We call them desperate. We call them needy. We use the small, careful words that let us keep them at a distance. But the woman who can knock on a stranger's door at midnight with a sick child in her arms and ask in a voice that does not break for half a glass of milk, that woman is not weak. She is carrying the last of her dignity in both hands and offering the world one more chance to be worthy of it. Most of us, if we are honest, would have let the child go hungry before we let our pride go cold. So perhaps the harder kindness is not the giving. Perhaps the harder kindness is the receiving, taking the help without flinching, looking the giver in the eye, and refusing even then to become smaller than the person you have always been. Sarah Whitman did not knock on Ethan Brooks's door that night to beg. She knocked to bargain with the world for one more night of being a human being. And perhaps the only question that ever really matters at a midnight door is not should I give,
But am I awake enough to recognize that the person standing there is offering me a chance to remember who I am? There are doors we open thinking we are doing someone a kindness. Years later, looking back, we understand we were the ones being saved. Maya did not finish the milk. She drank half of it slowly with the careful sips of a child who has learned not to trust full meals, and then her eyes drifted shut against Sarah's collarbone, and her small body went heavier in a way that Sarah had felt before in hospital wards and recognized at once. The fever had not broken. It had only taken a step back to gather itself. Ethan was watching from the kitchen doorway. He had been pretending to wipe down a counter that did not need wiping because he did not know what else to do with his hands. He saw the change in the child the same moment Sarah did. "How long has she been like this?" 3 days. Sarah's voice was steady, the way voices are steady when they are working very hard at it. "She had a cough on Sunday. I thought it was just a cold. I thought, we need to take her in. I can't, I don't have—" "I know," he said. "Get your coat." He woke Lily and told her to put on shoes, and she did it without asking questions the way she had learned to do things in the years after her mother. He carried Maya to the truck himself. Sarah tried to take her back at the door, and Ethan said gently, "Let me. Save your strength for what comes next." And Sarah, who had not let anyone carry anything for her in a long time, let him. The drive to St. Mary's took 11 minutes. None of them spoke. The wipers worked against the rain and the heater ticked, and Lily sat in the back seat with one small hand resting on the edge of the blanket Ethan had wrapped around Maya, as though she could keep the fever down by paying attention to it. Sarah looked out the passenger window at streets she had walked 1,000 times in the dark on her way to work, and she did not let herself think about where they were going until the truck turned in at the emergency entrance and the red of the sign washed over the dashboard. She had not been back since the day she cleaned out her locker. The intake nurse was young and tired and not unkind. She typed Maya's information into a screen Sarah could not see and asked the questions Sarah had been dreading in the order Sarah had been dreading them. Insurance. Sarah did not have any. Primary physician. Sarah did not have one of those either. Method of payment. Sarah's hands tightened around the strap of her bag. "Ma'am," the nurse said kindly enough, "I can get her seen, but I'm going to need a deposit before we can admit her for treatment. It's going to be $2,400. The number landed in the small space between them and sat there. Sarah started. I'm sorry, I'll need you to step aside while—" "I'll cover it," Ethan said. Sarah turned her head so quickly that something in her neck pulled and she did not feel it. No, Mr. Brooks, you can't." "I can. You don't even know us." He was already reaching for his wallet. "I know enough." He did not look at her when he said it. He looked at Maya, who was breathing in the way children breathe when their bodies are working too hard, and at Lily, who was watching Sarah's face as though learning something important about what grown-ups did when they were afraid. The nurse took the card. Ethan signed the paper. Sarah began to apologize, then began to apologize for apologizing, and Ethan touched her shoulder only once, only for a second, and said, "Sit down, ma'am. They'll come for her in a minute." She sat down in the molded plastic chair by the wall. She kept saying, "I'm sorry," very quietly to no one in particular, the way some people say grace at a meal they did not earn. Lily climbed into the chair next to her without being told and slipped her small hand into Sarah's and did not let go. Ethan did not sit. He went to find a water cooler. He found one eventually on the second floor. He had not meant to walk that far. He had meant to find a paper cup and bring it back. But the elevator had let him out on a floor he had not been on in 3 years, and his body had walked him down the corridor before his mind caught up. The 4th floor oncology wing of St. Mary's smelled exactly the way it had smelled the last time he had stood in it. Bleach and floor wax and something underneath that the bleach could never quite reach. The lights were the same flat fluorescent. The chairs in the small alcove halfway down the hall were the same chairs. He had spent more nights in those chairs than he could count anymore. He had given up counting somewhere in the 2nd month. Room 3. 07 was at the end of the hall. The door was closed.
There was a different name on the small placard, now a name that was not Claire Brooks, and Ethan stood across from it in the dim hallway and felt something inside his chest go quiet in a way it had not been quiet in years. He did not hear the woman come up beside him until she spoke. Mr. Brooks. She was older. Her hair had gone fully white. But she was the same nurse who had stood at the foot of Claire's bed on the last morning and told him very gently that they were going to give her something now to make her comfortable, and that comfortable was a word the hospital used when there was nothing else to do. "Margaret," he said. His voice did not come out the way he expected. "I thought it was you. I almost didn't recognize well. It's been a while." She studied him in the way kind people study someone they once watched go through something terrible. "Are you all right? Is somebody, a friend," he said, "downstairs? A child?" She nodded. She did not push. She started to walk on, then turned back. "You know who I always thought about after," Margaret said, "from those nights with your wife." "Who?" "The cleaning woman, the one with the gray braid. She used to come in at 3 in the morning when I was charting, and she'd sit with your wife so you could go down to the cafeteria and actually eat something. Do you remember her?" Ethan stood very still in the hallway. "She used to call her Miss Claire," Margaret said. "Nobody else on this floor called her by her first name. I always thought that was something." The water cooler was forgotten. The paper cup was forgotten. Ethan thanked Margaret and walked back to the elevator on legs that did not entirely belong to him. And he rode down to the first floor with one hand braced against the wall of the car because he was not just then sure he could stand up on his own. The doors opened. He walked out into the waiting area. Sarah was sitting where he had left her against the wall. Lily was leaning against her shoulder. The light above them was the flat hospital fluorescent that made everyone look like a worse version of themselves. And under it, Sarah looked very small and very tired and very old. He looked at her, and the memory came in 3 pieces. The first piece was a hallway. This hallway almost 4 years ago, in the middle of an afternoon that had run too long into evening. Claire had been in the hospital for almost a year by then. She had been wheeled into emergency surgery without warning when a complication the doctors had been watching for months finally turned the corner they had hoped it would not turn, and Ethan had been told that he had to sign the consent form before they could take her in. Lily had been almost 4. He had not had anyone to leave her with that day. He had been crouched in the hallway with her on his lap trying to read the form with one hand and keep her from sliding off his knees with the other, and the words on the form had been swimming in front of his eyes, and he had thought with the clean clarity of a man at the edge of breaking, "I cannot do this. I cannot hold a child and sign a piece of paper that might be the last thing I sign for her." A woman in pale blue scrubs had set her cleaning cart against the wall. She had walked over to him without speaking. She had crouched down beside him. "Let me sit with her, sir," she had said. "You sign your paper. I've got her." He had handed his daughter to a stranger because he had no choice, and the stranger had sat against the wall with Lily in her lap and shown her how to fold a paper towel into the shape of a rabbit, and Lily had quieted to almost at once, and he had signed the form. The second piece was the vending machine on the 3rd floor at 4 o'clock in the morning some nights later. He had been standing in front of it going through his pockets and discovering that the last of his cash had gone to the parking garage. He had leaned his forehead against the glass and laughed, once the dry laugh of a man who had been awake too long. When he had turned around, there had been a paper cup of coffee sitting on the bench behind him, still warm, and a sandwich in plastic wrap beside it. The cleaning woman had been at the far end of the hallway mopping. She had not looked up when he had said thank you. She had only lifted one hand without turning the way you wave at something you have already moved past. The third piece was the worst one, and it was the one he had kept locked deepest. A few months into Claire's illness on a Sunday afternoon in the family waiting area, a man in a polo shirt had been sitting across from Ethan and looking at him in a way Ethan had felt before in his life and learned to ignore. The man had finally leaned over to the duty nurse and said in the quiet, reasonable voice of someone who believed himself to be reasonable, "Ma'am, are you sure he's the husband? Have you checked his ID?" The nurse had blinked. She had looked at Ethan, who had been sitting there with a hospital bracelet on his own wrist that read, visitor spouse of patient 307. The nurse had not known what to say. Ethan had stood up. He had not trusted himself to speak. His hands had begun to shake at his sides in the way they shook only when he was trying very hard not to break something. A woman with a cleaning cart had been wiping down the counter at the nurse's station. She had set down her cloth. She had walked over to the man in the polo shirt without hurrying, and she had said in a voice that was not raised but was not gentle either, "This is Mr. Brooks. I have watched him sit with that woman in there for 3 months straight, and I'm sorry, sir, but who are you exactly?" The man had not answered. He had gone red, and then he had gathered his magazine and his coat and moved to a different chair at the other end of the room. The cleaning woman had turned to Ethan. "I'm sorry about that, Mr. Brooks. Some people forget themselves." And then she had gone back to her cart, and she had not mentioned it again, and he had never thanked her for it because he had not known how. She was the only person in that hospital in 11 months of coming and going who had ever called him Mr. Brooks. To everyone else, he had been the husband or the dad, or once memorably, the guy in the waiting room. To her, he had been a man with a name. He looked at Sarah Whitman sitting in the chair against the wall under the fluorescent light, apologizing to the floor for taking up space. The paper cup he had not brought back from the second floor was gone from his hand. He had dropped it somewhere. He did not remember dropping it. He sat down in the chair across from her. "Sarah," he said. She looked up. She had not told him her last name, and he had not asked, and he had been calling her ma'am all night. "Sarah," he said again, and his voice did something that was not quite a question and not quite an answer. "It was you." She looked at him for a long moment. Then her face changed. It was not surprise. It was the look of a person discovering that something they had buried so they could keep walking had been walking right beside them the whole time. "Mr. Brooks," she whispered, "you sat with my daughter." "I sat with her," Sarah said. "She had the smallest hands I ever saw." Lily, who had been listening without understanding, looked up at the woman whose shoulder she had been leaning against and tilted her head, and something in her young face shifted in a way Ethan did not have the vocabulary for. Sarah began to cry without making any sound. Ethan did not know what to say to her. He did not say anything. He reached across the small space between the chairs and took her hand, the rough hand of a woman who had cleaned other people's rooms for 22 years. And he held it the way she had held his daughter on a long afternoon almost 4 years ago, when he had needed someone to hold her for him. People talk about prejudice as though it is a loud thing. They imagine it shouting from a podium or burning a cross or hurling a slur from a moving car. Most of the prejudice in a life is not loud. Most of it is a very polite question asked by a man in a polo shirt in a waiting room. "Are you sure he's the husband?" It does not shout. It does not need to. It is a small civil knife slid between the ribs of a person who is already grieving, and the people who hear it usually look at their shoes because intervention is uncomfortable and silence is free. Sarah Whitman had not looked at her shoes. She had set down her cloth and walked across a waiting room and used the one weapon a hospital cleaning woman has, which is the simple sentence, "I saw what happened, and I will say so out loud." She had done it for a stranger. She had done it without expecting to be remembered. She had gone home that night almost certainly and forgotten all about it before she finished her tea. This is the thing about the truly kind: they do not keep a ledger. They give the small, costly defenses and the small, costly courtesies, and they walk away without writing them down, and so when life eventually breaks them, there is no one with a record book to step forward and say, "Wait, this woman is owed." But the universe, as it turns out, keeps its own books in its own way. It does not always pay back the giver. Sometimes it pays forward into a different decade through a different door. Sometimes it waits 3 years, and then it sends a sick child and a yellow porch light, and a man who has just remembered with a force that nearly takes him to his knees who he owes. The doctor came out at a little after 4 in the morning. His face was the face doctors learn to wear when they are about to ask families to be brave. Maya's lungs, he said, were worse than they had hoped. The infection had moved fast. He recommended admission intravenous antibiotics, a minimum of 2 weeks of inpatient care, and possibly more if she did not respond to the first round. He did not name a number because numbers were not his job, but the woman at the billing desk would in the morning, and the number she named would be $18,000 total payable in 3 installments over the course of the treatment, with the first installment of $6,000 due at admission. Sarah heard the words. She said, all right, doctor, thank you," in the voice of a woman who has been thanking people her whole life for delivering bad news politely. When the doctor was gone, she turned to Ethan. "You've done enough," she said. "I mean it. You take your little girl home. You've already given more than anybody had any right to ask of you." Sarah, I'll figure it out. I'll talk to the social worker in the morning. There are programs. There has to be something." "I'll handle it," he said. No, you won't. You have a daughter. You have a business. I will not let you." "I'll handle it," he said again. And this time it was not an offer. It was a fact, the way a man states a fact to himself before he has finished understanding what it costs. He drove Lily home a little before sunrise. He carried her up the stairs because she had fallen asleep in the truck, and he laid her in her bed without taking off her shoes, and he stood in her doorway for a moment watching her breathe, and then he went downstairs. The mail had come the day before, and he had not opened it. He did so now, standing at the kitchen counter under the single bulb, because he was not yet ready to go to bed, and because some part of him already knew. The envelope at the top of the stack was from First National. The letter inside was 3 paragraphs long, and the second paragraph used the phrase 30 days to cure the default before formal foreclosure proceedings, and the third paragraph thanked him for his attention to this matter. He set the letter down on the counter. He smoothed it flat with his hand the way a man smooths something he is trying to understand. Brooks Auto was 3 months behind. He had known it was 2. He had not opened last month's notice. The figure to bring the loan current was $14,000. He sat down at the kitchen table. He had $6,200 in savings. The account had Lily's name on it as a beneficiary. He had been putting $20 a week into it since she was old enough to ride a bike against the day still faintly imagined, when she might want to go somewhere with her mind that he had not been able to go himself. He took a piece of paper from the drawer and a pencil from the cup by the phone, and he began to write the numbers down. $6,000 for Maya's first installment, and $12,000 more for the 2 installments after that. $14,000 for the garage, $6,200 in the bank. The arithmetic was cruel and very simple. There was no version of these numbers in which all 3 things survived without help he did not yet have. The phone rang shortly after 7. It was the hospital. Maya had developed respiratory distress. They had moved her to the pediatric intensive care unit. Could he come? He was listed on the admission paperwork as the responsible party. He stood up. He put the letter from the bank into his coat pocket without thinking about it. He went and woke Lily, and this time she did not ask why, because she had learned in the past few hours that there were nights when grown-ups did not have the kind of answers a child could be told. In the back seat of the truck, she clutched something in both arms. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw what it was. It was a stuffed rabbit. Maya had left buttons on the couch when they had carried her out, and Lily, getting dressed in the dim morning, had thought to bring it with them. The drive to St. Mary's took 9 minutes this time. The streets were just beginning to wake. He found Sarah in the corridor outside the PICU, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall because there were no chairs. She had taken her shoes off without realizing it. She looked up when she saw him coming, and she got slowly to her feet, and she said, before he had reached her, "Ethan, don't do this." "Don't do what?" "Don't save me because you feel like you owe me. Years ago, I sat with your baby for an afternoon in a hallway. That's not a debt. That's not you don't have to ruin yourself for someone who is almost out of life anyway. Sarah, I am asking you," she said, and her voice broke for the first time all night, "as a favor. Take your daughter and go home. Please. I can't have you on my conscience, too." He did not have an answer for her. He looked down. Lily was standing between them, holding the stuffed rabbit, looking up. "Daddy," "Yes, baby." "If Mom was here," Lily said in the small, clear voice of a child working something out as she said it, "would she want us to help them?" Ethan went down on one knee. He brought himself to her level. He looked at his daughter, and his daughter looked back at him, and he did not say anything for a long time because there was nothing to say. After a moment, he stood up. He did not answer her question. He went over to the chair by the door, and he sat down in it, and he pulled out his phone, and he stared at it. He drove to the garage that morning after Sarah had finally agreed to let him go, and Lily had been left with a neighbor he trusted. He let himself in through the side door, and he turned on the light over the workbench, and he sat on the metal stool he had inherited from his father. He took out his phone. He typed a message to Sarah. "I'm sorry, I can't." He read it. He read it again. He thought about Lily's college account. He thought about the truck payment. He thought about the lien on the building and the way his father, who had built this place with his own 2 hands, used to say that a man's shop was the second most important room in his life, the first being the one his children slept in. He thought about closing the shop. He thought about what happened to Maya if the hospital did not get the second installment in 72 hours. His thumb hovered over the send key. He sat in the metal stool under the workbench light for what he later realized had been 17 minutes. Long enough that the coffee in the pot on the side counter which he had turned on out of habit had finished brewing and gone cold. He did not send the message. He looked up finally at the small, high window above the bench which faced the street, and through it he could see the yellow porch light still burning above the front entrance. The light he had left on every night for 3 years for a daughter who never went anywhere because his wife had said once in the hospital that she liked coming home to a house that looked like somebody was waiting up. He understood sitting there that the light had never really been for Lily. It had been for whoever needed it. He deleted the message. There is a thing nobody tells you about kindness in adulthood, which is that it is expensive. It is not free, and it is not easy, and it is not most of the time the obvious right answer. When Ethan Brooks sat at his kitchen table in the small hours of the morning with a pencil and a piece of paper, he was not standing between good and evil. He was standing between 2 different kinds of love. One of them was his own child. The other was a child he had met 4 hours ago. Both choices were defensible. Both choices would have been understood. There is no law in any moral universe that requires a single father with $6,000 in the bank to spend it on a stranger. So when we see somebody choose kindness anyway, when their own life is already on the edge, let us not flatter them by calling it natural. Let us not say they were just being a good person the way we might say of the weather, it was just a nice day. They paid for it. They paid in something real. And they are not better than us for paying. They are simply in that moment more awake than us to what kind of life they want to have lived when somebody asks them at the end what they did with what they had. Children do not remember the gifts their parents bought them. They do not remember the brand of sneakers or the size of the cake or the price tag of the bicycle. They remember how their parents treated the people who had less than they did on the nights when nobody was watching. That is the only inheritance that survives. The Mustang had been parked at the back of the garage under a canvas tarp for as long as Lily had been alive. It was a 1968 fastback, the color of a green apple in late summer. The chrome was original. The leather on the driver's seat had a thin crack along the left bolster from the day in 1973 when Ethan's father had slid in too quickly with a screwdriver in his back pocket and never forgiven himself for the mark. It was the car Henry Brooks had taught his son on a wrench in one hand and a coffee in the other, talking about timing belts, the way other fathers talked about scripture. It was the car Ethan had picked Claire up in for their first date on a Saturday in May when she had laughed at the way the engine sounded and said, "That's not a car, that's a heartbeat." It was the only thing he owned that had been touched by every person he had ever loved. He pulled the tarp off in the gray light before sunrise. He stood looking at it for a while. Then he went inside and posted the listing on his phone before he could talk himself out of it. He priced it low. He wanted it gone fast. He did not want a negotiation, and he did not want a man in a baseball cap running his hand along the fender and saying, "I'll have to think about it." He wanted the money in 72 hours, and he was prepared to leave $4,000 on the table to get it. The phone rang at 9:15. The voice on the other end was a voice he had not heard in almost 5 years. Marcus Riley had been one of his first regulars when the shop opened, a union electrician with 3 kids and a 1996 pickup that ran on stubbornness and Marcus's refusal to admit it was finished. In the winter of the layoffs, when the local was on strike for 11 weeks and Marcus had not worked a paid day in 2 months, his transmission had gone out on a Tuesday. He had come into the shop with that particular straight back a man wears when he is preparing to be told no, and he had asked Ethan how much. Ethan had looked in the truck. He had looked at Marcus. He had said, "Pay me when you can." He had rebuilt the transmission himself over a weekend, and he had not sent an invoice, and Marcus had paid him back in pieces over the next year, $50 here, $80 there, and the last installment had come in a Christmas card with a note that just said, "Thank you." Ethan had filed the card in the bottom drawer of his desk. "I saw the listing," Marcus said on the phone. "The Mustang. That's your dad's car." "Yeah." "You sure?" "I'm sure." "What's going on, Brooks?" Ethan looked at the wall. He did not want to explain it. He did not want to ask for anything. He had spent his whole adult life refusing to ask for anything. "Long story," he said. "How long do you need it sold by my 3 days?" "What are you asking?" 11. "I'll give you 18. "Marcus, that's not what it's worth on the—" "I know what it's worth," Marcus said. "I also know what you didn't charge me in 2019. And I know 2 other guys at the local who'd buy it off me tomorrow for 20 if I wanted to flip it, which I don't, because I'm not going to. I've been carrying that debt for 5 years. Let me put it down." Ethan did not trust himself to answer for a moment. He turned and faced the back wall of the office where his father's old framed license still hung beside a calendar from a parts supplier. "Okay," he said. "I'll be there at noon." Sarah came to the garage at 10 in the morning. She had not slept. The hospital had let her stay overnight in a chair by Maya's bed, and her clothes were the same clothes from the night of the rain, dried stiff and smelling faintly of antiseptic. She walked into the office holding the cookie tin against her chest, the way a child holds a school project. "I want to give you something," she said. She set the tin on the desk between them. She lifted the lid. The Christmas cards were still there. The photograph of her husband at the barbecue. The graduation program. And on top of all of it, where she had laid it carefully that morning, was a thin gold band with a single word engraved on the inside, always in the looping cursive of a jeweler in 1976. "You told me you sold it," Ethan said. "I lied. I'm sorry. I told myself I had sold it because I knew if I admitted I still had it, I would have to use it for rent, and then I wouldn't have it anymore." Her hand had not left the edge of the tin. "I have given a lot of things away in my life, Mr. Brooks. Most of them I gave away because I had to. This one is mine. My husband put this on my finger 41 years ago. It is the last thing in this world that belongs to me and not to circumstance. Sarah, if I let you carry all of it, I am not a person anymore. I am a charity case. I cannot let you do that to me. If you take this, then I am paying. Do you understand the difference?" He understood the difference. He had been on the wrong side of the difference enough times in his life to understand it perfectly. He did not take the ring. He closed the lid of the tin gently with the ring still inside, and he slid it back across the desk to her. "I'll tell you what I understand," he said. "I understand you have already paid. You paid years ago in a hallway upstairs, and you didn't send me an invoice, and I'm not going to start one now. That's not fair. It's not supposed to be fair, Sarah. It's supposed to be even." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something he did not expect. She laughed just once, a small, wet laugh, and she shook her head. "Your wife," she said, "used to talk about you exactly like this. She said you were stubborn in the kindest possible way. She said a lot of things. She said you'd make a good father one day. She was right about that, too." He did not know what to say to that. He did not say anything. After a moment, Sarah picked up the tin and stood up. "You keep the ring on the desk," she said. "I'll come back for it when I've earned it." She walked out into the front of the shop, and Ethan heard her stop, and he heard her sit down in the customer chair by the window. and he understood that she had decided without telling him that she was going to start earning it now. Word travels in small neighborhoods, the way water travels in dry ground. By 11 that morning, a woman named Eileen Carter, who had been bringing her station wagon to Brooks Auto since the year it opened, walked in with an envelope and laid it on the counter. There were $600 inside. She did not say what was in it. She said, "I'd like to pay for next year's service plan up front, please. All of it." Ethan tried to refuse, and Eileen looked at him over the top of her bifocals in the way she had once looked at her own grown sons when they had tried to lie to her, and Ethan stopped trying to refuse. A retired bus driver named Thomas Lyle came in at noon with a casserole dish wrapped in a dish towel and a check folded underneath it for $400. He would not explain himself. He set both on the counter beside the envelope and left. A young woman Ethan did not recognize, who turned out to be the daughter of a customer he had not seen in 2 years, came in at 12:30 and left a check for $1,000 on the desk, with no name on the memo line and no expectation of acknowledgement. By the end of the day, between the small envelopes of folded cash and the named checks, and the 2 regulars who paid for service plans they did not need, the front desk held a little over $3,200 Ethan had not asked for. Marcus arrived at 12:45 with a flatbed and a cashier's check. He did not say very much when he loaded the Mustang. He ran his hand along the hood once, the way a man greets a horse he has been waiting to ride, and then he tied it down and he handed Ethan the check and he said, "I'll bring it by sometimes, so your daughter can see it, so she knows where it is." And then he drove away before Ethan could thank him properly. That evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the same pencil and a fresh piece of paper. 18 from Marcus, $6,200 from the savings account, $3,200 from the neighborhood, $27,400 on the table against a need of $32. He still did not have all of it, but he had enough to stop the bleeding. He paid the first installment on Maya's care in full and a partial second from the same draft which the hospital agreed after a phone call to accept as a holding payment against the rest. He took the remainder down to First National in person and laid it in front of a loan officer named Greg, and he asked quietly and without flourish for a 60-day extension on the difference. Greg looked at the spreadsheet. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the spreadsheet again. He said, "Mr. Brooks, you've been current for 9 years before this slipped. I can give you 90. Ethan thanked him and walked out into the parking lot and sat in his truck for a long time before he was able to drive it home. He did not save everything, Ave. He had to let one of the 2 junior mechanics go. The boy was 22 and had a baby on the way, and Ethan sat with him in the office and explained the math. And the boy nodded the whole way through and shook Ethan's hand at the end and said, "You do what you have to do. Mr. Brooks, you bring me back when you can." Ethan brought him back 6 months later, the day the books crossed back into black, and the boy cried in the parking lot and pretended he had something in his eye. He had to take down the sign for the second service bay and tarp the lift. The garage went from 4 bays to 2. It would stay at 2 for almost a year. He had to tell Lily that the Spanish tutoring she had asked for, which she had been excited about since September, was going to have to wait a little longer. She listened to the way he explained it, and she thought about it for a moment, and then she said, "That's okay, Daddy. I can practice with Maya." Maya knows some words. He did not know if that was true. He did not ask. He kissed the top of her head and went into the garage and stood by his father's workbench for a while with his hand on the wood. Maya came home from the hospital on a Saturday in the middle of the 3rd week. She was thinner. She tired easily. The doctor had said it would be 2 more months before her lungs were fully back. But she was breathing on her own in the regular, quiet way children breathe, and she had not whistled once since the morning she had been moved out of the PICU. She started drawing again the first afternoon she was home. She drew on the back of a parts catalog Ethan had left on the kitchen table with a pencil Lily had sharpened for her. The first picture she drew was a small, low building with a yellow light above the door and 2 figures standing in front of it. At the bottom, in careful block letters, she wrote, "Mr. Ethan's Light." She walked it into the office at the end of the afternoon and held it up to him without saying anything, the way she did most things, and she waited. He took it from her. He found a frame for it the next day. He hung it on the wall above the desk between his father's license and the parts supplier calendar, and that was where it stayed. Sarah began coming to the shop in the mornings. She answered the phone. She kept the appointment book in her square, steady handwriting with the dates underlined in blue. She brought her own thermos of coffee and refused to take any from the office pot, and when customers came in, she greeted them by name, the names she had begun memorizing the first week, and the customers began asking for her by name in return. She was good at the work because she had spent her life in the company of strangers and had never once treated one of them like a stranger. She did not apologize for taking up space anymore. One morning in the spring, Ethan came out of the back office and found the cookie tin sitting on the front counter. "I bought my own coffee mug last week," Sarah said without looking up from the book. "I think I'm ready." He opened the tin. The ring was still inside, tucked in the corner where she had left it. He took it out. He walked around the counter. He held it out to her on his open palm. "Then take it back," he said. "You earned it years ago, ma'am. I was just holding it for you." She took it. She slid it onto her finger where it had lived for 41 years before life had asked her to take it off, and she did not cry because she was past the kind of grief that cries. She just nodded once and went back to writing in the book. There is a way we like to imagine kindness in stories. We like to imagine it as a straight line. I helped you. You thanked me, the end. It is a satisfying shape. It fits on a greeting card. It travels well on the internet. But kindness is almost never a straight line in real life. In real life, kindness is a circle that does not close. Sarah Whitman was kind to a dying woman in a hospital room because that was the kind of human being Sarah was, and the dying woman who could not pay her back wrote down an address on a piece of paper and gave it to her, and the piece of paper sat at the bottom of a tin for 3 years without doing anything at all. And then on a rainy night, a fever brought it back out, and a man warmed a cup of milk on a stove, and a child whistled 3 soft notes, and a different child carried a stuffed rabbit to a hospital. And somewhere along the way, the circle bent back through itself, and Sarah Whitman ended up being saved by the husband of the woman she had once stayed up all night with. Nobody in that circle saw the whole shape of it. None of them were supposed to. That is the difference between kindness and a transaction. A transaction needs to know who paid. Kindness does not. We do not believe the universe is fair. Anyone who has lived long enough has stopped believing that. There are gentle people who die forgotten and cruel people who die rich and no balance sheet at the end that any of us get to read. But there is one thing that may be true about the universe, which is that it does not let acts of kindness disappear entirely. It moves them. It moves them to where they are needed. Sometimes that is years later and miles away and through a door that the giver herself has to walk up to in the rain and knock on twice before anyone answers. So if there is someone in your life who was once kind to you and you never had the chance to thank them, do not grieve too hard. The universe may already be arranging things very quietly so that you can pay it forward to a stranger on a night when you would rather not. That is how the debt gets paid. Not back. Forward. A morning in late summer, almost a year after the rain, the Brooks Auto had its full sign up again. Both bays were running. There was a hand-lettered notice in the window that read in Sarah's blue ink, "Now hiring 1 mechanic, ask inside." Out on the porch of the small house attached to the back of the shop, 2 girls sat on the top step in matching shorts. Lily had grown almost 2 inches in the year. Maya had grown nearly 3. They were drinking glasses of milk that Ethan had set out for them on a metal tray, the kind of tall, thin glasses that had once belonged to Claire's mother and had sat untouched in a cabinet for almost 4 years. Maya was telling Lily a story about a rabbit that had learned to fly. Lily was correcting her on points of physics. Buttons sat between them with his ears flopping over the edge of the step. Sarah came out of the office wiping her hands on a shop rag. The gold band on her finger caught the sun. "Ethan," she said, "the Henderson boy is on the phone. He wants to know if we can do his alignment Thursday or if it has to wait till Friday." "Tell him Thursday." "Thursday it is." She turned to go back inside. She stopped. She looked at him over her shoulder.
Her face did the small, private smile of a person sharing a joke with the version of themselves from a year ago. "You know," she said, "that night I really only came for a glass of milk." Ethan was leaning against the doorframe of the garage. The yellow porch light, which he still left on every night, was off in the morning sun, but it was there above his head, ready for the dark. "No, ma'am," he said. "You brought me my whole family back." The summer evening came on slow. The light on the porch came on at dusk, the way it always did, the way it had every night for almost 4 years now. The girls finished their milk and went inside, and the glasses sat empty on the tray, and the moths began their small, soft work around the bulb above the door. There is a thing his father used to say that Ethan had not understood when he was young. Every door has 2 sides, son. One side is the side that keeps you safe. The other side is the side that lets somebody find you. Most men spend their lives shutting the wrong one. He had almost shut the wrong one on a rainy night a year ago with a woman on his porch who was holding the last of her dignity in both hands. He thought about it sometimes late when the house was quiet and Lily was asleep upstairs and Maya was asleep in the small room they had made for her at the end of the hall. He thought about how thin the difference had been. A second. A held breath. A child coming halfway down a staircase with a carton of milk. We will not, most of us, change the world. The world is too big and too old and too set in its ways. But tonight, if there is a knock at your door, look carefully before you close it. Sometimes the person knocking is not asking you for anything at all. Sometimes they are coming after a very long way around to deliver a debt the world has been carrying for them, payable to you in a currency you have forgotten you were owed. And sometimes a porch light left on and a door not quite shut is the only thing standing between a stranger and one more night in the dark. That is enough. That has always been enough. That is the whole of the thing.